Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Tuesday night and we're studying the Dao De Jing. We'll be studying verses 39 and 40 this evening. As always, just to line up, type exclamation point in the chat to read the verse that had spoken to you most, and we can get started from there. Evanique.
Okay, so I'm reading from the God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. So verse 39, people of ancient times possessed oneness. The sky attained oneness and so became clear. Earth attained oneness and so found peace. The spirit attains oneness and so is replenished. The valleys attained oneness and so became full. All things attained oneness and they flourish. The ancient leaders attained oneness and so became examples for all the world. All of this is achieved by oneness. Without oneness, the sky would crack, the earth explode, the spirit exhaust, the valley deplete. Leaders would certainly fall, and all life perish. Therefore, the great recognizes the small as its root. The high takes the low as its foundation. Leaders refer to themselves as orphans and widows. Is this not grounding oneself in humility? Therefore, the highest renown is no renown. We do not want to glitter like jewels. We do not want to be hard as stone.
Thank you, Evanique. Would Margaretha. And then Katie.
Yes. Good morning from Grey Melbourne today.
Good morning.
However, I think the Indonesian translation, they overly translate it because somehow it's mentioned about God now, the one God, but I will read it in Bahasa. Sejak zaman dahulu, tak bisa lain barang siapa bersatu pada Yang Maha Esa, yang akan memperoleh kesempurnaan. Misalkan langit memperoleh persatuan menjadi terang, dan bumi memperoleh persatuan menjadi tenang. Dewa memperoleh persatuan menampilkan kemukjizatan, lembah memperoleh persatuan menjadi padat, segala makhluk memperoleh persatuan hingga hidup. Raja memperoleh persatuan hingga dapat memerintah negerinya dengan bijaksana. Dengan demikian, kesempurnaan mereka didapatkan karena persatuan dengan Yang Maha Esa. Bila langit tidak terang, dikhawatirkan akan menimbulkan kekacauan. Bila bumi tidak tenang, dikhawatirkan akan menimbulkan bencana. Bila dewa tidak menampilkan kemujizatan, akan menampilkan kemusnahan. Bila lembah tidak padat, akan mengalami kekeringan. Bila segala makhluk tak menampilkan kelahiran, dikhawatirkan akan musnah. Bila raja tak bijaksana, dikhawatirkan pemerintahan akan hancur. Maka yang mulia menggunakan yang hina sebagai pokok, yang tinggi menggunakan rendah sebagai dasar. Dari sebab itu, raja yang mulia, tapi tidak sombong, bahkan menyebut dirinya serba kekurangan, bukanlah ini yang disebut kehinaan, tapi pokok kemuliaan. Maka orang dapat memperoleh nama mulia, tidak mengagung-agungkan namanya sendiri. Maka orang bijak tidak memamer-mamerkan dirinya, laksana mutiara yang gemerlapan, bahkan memperlihatkan dirinya seolah-olah batu kerikil biasa. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
And then I'm going to read from the Stephen Mitchell version. In harmony with the sky is clear and spacious. The earth is solid and full. All creatures flourish together, content with the way they are, endlessly repeating themselves, endlessly renewed. When man interferes with the Tao, the sky becomes filthy, the earth becomes depleted, the equilibrium crumbles, creatures become extinct. The master views the parts with compassion because he understands the whole. His constant practice is humility. He doesn't glitter like a jewel, but lets himself be shaped by the Tao as rugged and common as stone.
Thank you, Katie. Next, I have David.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I mean, did you want to read any of the, I don't know, the DC Lin version or the Fang in English? I don't want to step on whatever your.
I'll probably read the Ursula Le Guin
Okay.
version in, maybe a little bit later, as we're during our discussion, just to recenter us at some point. So whatever you want to read, go ahead.
Okay, I like the old one, but I can read a couple of these others if you don't have other volunteers. We've been going through a couple of these that generally seem to be interesting to people. But the old version is, these things have from the beginning attained unity. Earth through unity is firm. Spirits through unity are active. The valley through unity is brimming. All creatures through unity multiply. Kings and princes through unity govern the world. Yes, in all these things works unity. If heaven through unity were not clear, it would be rent. If earth through unity were not firm, it would topple over. If spirits through unity were not active, they would shrivel away. If the valley through unity were not brimming, it would dry up. If all creatures through unity did not multiply, they would die out. If kings and princes through unity did not govern the world, they would be overthrown. For nobility has its roots in humility, and the high is built on a foundation that is low. Thus kings and princes speak of themselves as orphans, the lonely ones, the unworthy. In this way, they acknowledge that their might is rooted in the lowly. Surely this is so. For without the component parts of a wagon, there is no wagon. The sages of old sought to be neither the isolated single gem, nor yet the common stone among other stones.
Thank you, David. See, do we have anybody else that wishes to share this evening? If not, I will turn it over to Jason.
Brian.
Oh, Brian, forgive me. I didn't see you.
I'm reading from the DC Lao version. And it's chapter 39, I think it's correct. Of old, these came to be in possession of the One. Heaven, in virtue of the One, is limpid. Earth, in virtue of the One, is settled. Gods, in virtue of the One, have their potencies. The valley, in virtue of the One, is full. The myriad creatures, in virtue of the One, are alive. Lords and princes, in virtue of the One, become leaders in the empire. It is the One that makes these what they are. Without what makes it limpid, heaven might split. Without what makes it settled, earth might sink. Without what gives them their potencies, gods might spend themselves. Without what makes it full, the valley might run dry. Without what keeps them alive, the myriad creatures might perish. Without what makes them leaders, lords and princes might fall. Hence, the superior must have the inferior as root. The high must have the low as base. Thus, lords and princes refer to themselves as solitary, desolate, and hapless. This is taking the inferior as root, is it not? Hence, the highest renown is without renown, not wishing to be one among many like jade, nor to be aloof like stone.
Thank you, Brian. And would anyone else like to share their version of the Tao? David.
Actually, I'd like to read the thing in English as well. There's
Oh,
an
cool.
interesting.
Very
I'm
good.
interested to hear what Jason and Mon have how their translation goes, because it's interesting how it starts off, because the thing in English starts as, these things from ancient times arise from one. The sky is whole and clear. The earth is whole and firm. The spirit is whole and strong. The valley is whole and full. The 10,000 things are whole and alive. Kings and lords are whole, and the country is upright. All these are in virtue of wholeness. The clarity of the sky prevents its falling. The firmness of the earth prevents its splitting. The strength of the spirit prevents its being used up. The fullness of the valley prevents its running dry. The growth of the 10,000 things prevents their dying out. The leadership of kings and lords prevents the downfall of the country. Therefore, the humble is the root of the noble. The low is the foundation of the high. Princes and lords consider themselves orphaned, widowed, and worthless. Do they not depend on being humble? Too much success is not an advantage. Do not tingle like jade or clatter like stone chimes. So I find it interesting that they, with all this unity in the previous ones, and this one's uses whole in this, whole in that, and the 10,000. I'm just going to be very fascinated what the actual Chinese symbols are that correspond to that framework that was used in this translation.
That's a great point. I'm looking forward to that as well. And I think we have one more person that was willing to, Charlie. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wanted to read the Roger Ames because I wasn't sure if I was going to read it or not, because I wanted to listen to what other people had to say. But I decided to go ahead and do it as I think it might be complementary. Of old, there were certain things that realized oneness. The heavens, in realizing oneness, became clear. The earth, in realizing oneness, became stable. The numinous, in realizing oneness, became animated. The river valleys, in realizing oneness, became full. The lords and kings, in realizing oneness, brought proper order to the world. Following this line of thinking, we could say that if the heavens had not become clear, they may well have fallen to pieces. We could say that if the earth had not become stable, it may well have collapsed. We could say that if the numinous had not become animated, it may well have faded away. We could say that if the river valleys had not become full, they may well have dried up. We could say that if the lords and kings had not brought proper order to the world, they may well have stumbled and fallen from power. Thus, for something to be noble, it must take the humble as its root. For something to be high, it must take the low as its foundation. It is for this reason that the lords and kings used friendless, unworthy, and inept as terms to refer to themselves. This is a clear case of taking the humble as the root, is it not? The highest renown is to be without renown. They do not want to be precious like jade, but common like stone.
Thank you, Charlie. And does anybody else wish to share?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Brian, go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to signal in the chat. Jim Klatfelter
Okay.
is my translator. I don't think I've heard him yet. The slightly different at the very beginning. If you stay with clear awareness, the sky is open, pure and spacious. The earth is firm and friendly too. Activity is efficacious. But depart from clarity, the purest sky is torn apart. The earth is so divided. Felicity must flee your heart. The seer knows humility, doesn't argue or control, doesn't discard anything or mutilate the whole. The seer doesn't show at all, doesn't sparkle like a jewel. The seer's vast immensity is truly less than minuscule.
Thank you for that, Brian. Yeah, I didn't see your exclamation point in the chat, so sorry about that.
Well, for some reason, it's not going through.
Okay. And so with that, Jason, would you like to share your version?
Yeah, as usual. Okay. Okay, hold on. Just 1 minute. I think I get the wrong one. Okay, then we'll do one more time. Did you see the table here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. Can I ask Charlie, when you read what's the thing before river body? You have the heaven, earth, and what's the next one?
Just a second. I gotta get it. Exit full screen. And okay, could you say the question again, please?
My question is, you talk about heaven. They have a 16 talking about. Yeah, I think you talk about the river body will dry up.
Okay, yeah.
Before river body. What's that? I didn't catch
Okay,
the
it says, following this line of thinking, we could say that if the heavens had not become clear, they may well have fallen to pieces.
Okay, next one.
We could say that if the earth had not become stable, it may well have collapsed.
And next one.
We could say that if the numinous had not become animated,
What's
may well-
luminous? Okay.
It's I don't know the Chinese. Okay, so the first the first thing it says, let's see, of old there were certain things, and the heavens in realizing oneness, the earth in realizing oneness. So it's like a fourth line, the numinous in realize, you know. So numinous, yeah, numinous, like I guess that's supposed to be connected to Kant's idea of the noumena.
That's why I find the okay. All right, okay. So okay, I think that this chapter is very long, and then we don't have a lot of people, so I don't want like turn out become like a monologue for so long. So if you are okay, you know, if Joe you are okay, then if you have a question or something I'm not clear, please interrupt me. So you know, I think this one is quite long, you know, in the Chinese ancient text standard. So I think we talk about like a heaven, earth, you know, a numerator according to Charlie's version, and the river body and the southern things and the Lord. Okay, so. Yeah,
so let me just make sure it's clear to everyone. Feel free to, should they just type an exclamation point in the chat while you're going through it to ask questions?
Yeah, please.
So,
yeah, because
okay.
So make everybody clear on this one. So this one is very long, but actually it's not that complex. If you make a table, right? So basics, all the text goes through certain format. Okay. So first they list the 6 different things. Okay. So the translation. Okay. I list the Chinese word. Okay. The first usually talk about heaven, but I think here is not heaven, it's a sky. Okay, talking about the sky. Okay, the real sky, no divine power. And then earth, basically is not talk about the globe earth, talking about our land. Okay, and then the third thing I'm asking Charlie, but most translation talk about spirit. And I think this one is kind of not in the German word Geist, kind of spirit, our spiritual, or the Zeitgeist, this kind of spirit. I think talk about kind of like a fairy, okay, some kind of like a ghost. Okay, I will explain that. And the next one is Gu, and most translation is valley or river valley, but I think that means a basin. Okay, because you can see this one, they go 3 pairs, 16 goes 3 pairs. And they talk about southern things. I think that I always translate as all things. That means include all the animal, all the farm, agriculture, and the people. That means everything. And the Lord. Okay. So if you look at this one, okay, the 16, you can see it's not random. Okay. They go by further to close. Let's assume this one is teaching to the Lord. Okay, teaching to the prince, right? The first is sky. Okay, they talk about the weather, you know, the sky, the real sky. Then talk about the land. Then talk about the spirit. Okay, spirit, okay, sky and the land, that's a pair, right? And the spirit and the basin, that's also a pair, okay? Because that's, think about that time, Chinese is an agricultural country. So the basin is like a lake, that's the low end, they have the storage of water. And then whether or not they have water, basically they have some supernatural things, okay, will control that. That's why that's their concern. And this one also explains, if you go back to, I think the chapter 6, okay, the Dao De Jing talk about the, they also use these two words. Okay, I've been very puzzled about these two words keep coming up. But right now I understand because they talk about two things, but in the pair, because the basin and the spirit, which will have some influence on the basin. And the basin is important, you need the water. Otherwise, you have no water for your corn, your agriculture. So you see, go from further to closer to basin and to everything, to the people, then to the Lord. Okay, so that's the order they are doing. And all this text, they talk about oneness. I think all the translation talk about this, talk about oneness. But the oneness is, I think it's in chapter 42, they start talking about the oneness is produced by Dao. Dao will produce oneness. And here they talk about oneness. So basically, all the text is very simple. They talk about for something that's I call it X, right? X, if X having attained oneness, then what happen is Y. Okay, so here is Y. Either clear, peaceful, active, abundant, productive, or become an exemplar. Okay, or I think I translate as a pillar. Okay, so basically you will see if sky got oneness become clear, the land got oneness become peaceful, or you want to call it stable. Okay, spirit got oneness will become active. So that's a pair. Then the next section go to something like if X, okay, doesn't get Y, it's not become clear, what will happen, which is opposite. So that means if sky is not clear, they will probably be fractured. If the earth is not peaceful, it probably will disrupt it. Because this word far means going out, like disrupt, okay? And then the spirit is not active, will become sedated. And the basin is not abundant. That means not enough water will dry up. And everything, okay, all things not productive will extinct. Okay, so let's go to pair. So actually everything will be simple. And if you lay out this one, you will find out the language is, the format is very simple. And the advantage of Chinese words is monotone. So unlike this one, if you read it in English, you will be fractured, disrupted, and sedated. You know, some long, some short. But in Chinese, the advantage of the 列, 发, 歇, 结, 灭, 绝, they all rhyme, okay, and the monotone. So if you read layout, you know, will become very beautiful layout like this one. Okay, so you will see this one is 16, they lay out, they will attend one in order to get something, right? So they are very weird. And when you read, it's monotone. So this format will start to build in your brain and it sounds very convincing. I think that's the way they try to convince the people. And that's how I start to figure out why I read English version, doesn't matter how you translate. It doesn't sound convincing. But if you read in Chinese, it's very convincing. So I think that's the reason. So let me work on my translation. So if you put this table, okay, in your mind, okay, then the translation become easy because you just follow the format. And if you have another 10 different things come out, you just build up this table and then write down, okay, use the same format. And even you can write Chinese because you just substitute with this one, with this 3, X, Y, and the Z, you just substitute with your word, then you can write it. So I think that's the way this text going to do. So the translation will become like this. This thing in the past that attend the oneness are as follows. They're going to talk about 6 things. The sky. having attained oneness will be clear. The land, having attained oneness, will be peaceful. The spirit, having attained oneness, will be active. The basis, having attained oneness, will be abundant. All things, having attained oneness, will be productive. Rulers, having attained oneness, will be the pillar of the world. Okay, this one is a little bit strange because this word could be sovereignty, could be standard, could be exemplar, but I think here probably means pillar, something stand up, because if you don't have the pillar, you will be overturned. So that means something support or stand straight. Okay, because this word, ancient word, has many meanings, and then we are not sure this word is the right word because the text is not very clear. So some people substitute with different word. Okay. So right now, go to the second part of the formula. If it's not this, okay, what will happen? So they will say, furthermore, okay, same thing, 16. If the sky is not clear, one day it may be fractured. Okay, the heaven will not fracture. It talk about the sky, talk about the weather. You can imagine like a thundering or weather is not doing well. Okay, if the land is not peaceful, one day it may be disrupted. If the spirits are not active, one day they may be sedated. If the basins are not abundant, one day they may be dried up. If all things are not productive, one day they may be extinct. If the rulers are not pillars, but merely noble and high, one day they may be overthrown. Okay, so that's the final punchline. So you can see that's how Lao Tzu tried to convince the prince. Okay, tell the prince, see, look at, you have to follow the Tao, which will produce oneness, right? And then they start to use the past example. Okay, the sky, the land, the spirit, the basin for agriculture, and everything, include the animal, farm, and the people, and they talk about you, what you have to do. If you don't do that, you will worry about like the sky will be fractured, the land will no more stable, okay, the spirit and then the basin will dry up, and then the thing will extinct, and your sovereignty or your state will be overthrown. Okay, so that's finish the first part of teaching. Then all tell this one, it tells the prince, you need to be humble, or you need to work on the foundation. So they say, thus, nobility is based on the humble pillar's base. Height is grounded on the lowly. This is why the ruler choosing humble words like the separated one, the lonely one, or the unsalaried man to refer to themselves. Okay, this one is talking about the high people in a high position. Usually you start from humble. So Lao Tzu's teaching is using the tradition. Okay, they are very old people, 2,500 years old, but they have some people much older than them. So they talk about their tradition. The Lord or the ruler usually call themselves, that's the three words, gu, gua, bugu. Okay, that's the they call themselves. They don't call themselves I or my, me. They don't do this. They use some other word. And I think the translation are, I hear and I also check, the translation are all wrong, in my opinion, because they called orphan, which this one, gu means orphan, gua means widow, and this one they translate as unworthy, and which is technically wrong. Basically, they call gu means I'm separated, okay, because you are king, right? You, of course, you separate with other minister. You are lonely, yes, of course, you are in the highest position, of course, you are lonely. That's why they call themselves gu gua. It means lonely, separated. And the bugu is an interesting one. Gu means grain or rice. At that time in China, the salary is based on how much grain or how much rice you give. So depend on your position, right? If you are in the prime minister, they must give you the rice, not yearly salary as the rice to support, let's say 200 people. That means you can have 200 servants with you. Okay, so that's the way as a currency. So the Lord, the king will call themselves no salary man. Okay, a technical term, they call themselves unemployed man, right? Because he's the boss, of course, he's not being employed. So that's the way the Lord call themselves, okay, as I. So Lao Tzu used this tradition as a teaching. Say, see, the person in a high position, they call themselves, use very humble word to call themselves. Does that mean, so this word, is that a case of taking the humble as the base? Is that it so? Okay, so that's the way they teach it. You may not see it's convincing, but that's the way they are. Lao Tzu is teaching. Say, look at how the successful one or the past Lord call themselves. That's proof. Okay, they always the humble as the base. So that's the final lesson will be. Therefore, many high honors are like no honors at all. Desire not to be glamorous like jade, but to be solid like simple rock. So you don't look at it. I think you are not. You are very familiar with this kind of language, right? Keep talking about you have to work on the foundation, be humble, work on the base. Don't be looking the glamorous like jade. You should be simple, solid like rock. I think that's the whole lesson of this one. Yeah. So I hope it makes sense, bring some sense. And then if you have any question, I will be happy to answer. And Aman also put a lot word on this one. And I think Aman probably agreed. This one probably, at least I'm very proud of this translation because I think word to word, okay, and then I reflect all the word in Chinese and reflect in the meaning in English properly, at least, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. Aman, would you like to comment?
Yeah, this was a task of a chapter. It is rough, and I wish I had seen that table before when we'd started because that really snapped everything that you did into sharp focus. I pulled it out as I was reading it. I was able to, understand, okay, I see the pattern you're going for, but when you actually lay it out in this sort of table set, it's like, oh, there's the formula. Yeah, there were not, we're getting better at this as we do it more. So there's less for me to quote unquote correct and more often just me offering my 2 cents or even, questioning something that Jason chose, like his choice for to translate the character's pillar. I found absolutely just the best version of that I had read. And it was shocking because it was not the normal way I had seen it translated before. But it makes it make a lot of sense. This is almost a lesson plan. I mean, when you could look at this, like this is the syllabus we're handing you for the day. Learn lesson 1, learn lesson 2. Now apply lesson 1, apply lesson 2. And if you remember that this is in the context that we have shifted the conversation to the virtue that someone is able to emanate. Here is how you go about developing your de. This is the lesson plan for developing that correctly. Not necessarily a lesson about the behaviors of the Tao, though there is some of that in there implicitly, in that the discussion of the basin, the discussion of the lowly is still factoring in. But here are the ways and means that you can go about developing the virtue in a real way, in a substantial and sustainable way. And that sustainability in the chat, Evanique was asking me about the word tian that Jason was talking about, so often translated as heaven, excuse me, that he translates as sky, and both are correct. It's just heaven has too much connotation in our culture to make it mean something more divine, more religious. And in ancient China, when they spoke of the heavens, go outside at night, look up, that's the heavens, the ceiling of the sky. But it's not merely the structure that is there. It's also the cyclic and steady, consistent, reliable movements and actions that you see in the heavens. That is the role model. That's the goal, is to be that consistent, that reliable, that eternal. That's the sort of eternity or immortality that some Taoists were seeking. Others took it much more literally and alchemical, but in the sort of philosophical sense, that's what you were to emulate as Qianxia, the son of heaven.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I see. So folks, anybody that would like to comment or ask Jason a question on what you took from the poem, or questions about what Jason's translation, or questions for Aman, please type up exclamation point in the chat. And I know that Margarita.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Unity, Jason and Amon, because I don't quite understand what is unity referred here, whether this is a unity between elements in the sky, in the land, in the spirits, or unity with the one, because often it is translated as God, even in Bahasa, and I see several translations as if like there's the third entity that we need to be integrated with. Yeah, I don't understand that. And why in the later sentence there is this mask that a ruler should use, that they're separated. I don't get it. Why we need to be unified, but somehow we mask ourselves as separated. Yeah, thank you.
Let me answer your question. Okay, so the unity translation, actually, if you see the Chinese word is one. Okay, so the original word is number one, the one. Okay, so either translate as a one or oneness or unity. Okay, so I think that's just number one, as simple as number one, just like one horizontal line. Okay, so that's the first thing. So if you read on, I think we will read the next week, is chapter 42. That's a very famous chapter, talk about the Tao will produce one. Okay, then again, the translation, unity, oneness, or harmony, or whatever. So basically talk about Tao will produce one will produce two will produce three will produce everything, right? Okay, so that's then you can ask why. Well, I don't know, but but that's they talking about. So I think that's the translation issue. And the second question, you talk about the separated. That's like my okay. The separated is, that's the Chinese word, 3 words, gu, gua, bugu. Okay, that's the word they use. You don't call yourself gu, gua, or this name. You don't call, because you are not at that position. Okay, only the person in the highest position, they will call themselves, okay, gu, gua, bugu. Either way, depend on the tradition. Okay, but these 3 words, if you take the word by word, it's not a good word, right? It's separate, means separate, means you are lonely, means you are unemployed. Okay, doesn't sound a good word. But why they are using it? Because they are in a high position. So in this way, Lao Tzu is using this tradition to teach the prince, okay, be humble, okay, just like this tradition, okay. The high position people will not call themselves the greatest, the Lord of Lord, the King of King, okay, the most fearing Lord in the universe. They don't call themselves this way. Okay? If you remember Gulliver's Travel, right? The 6-inch man, the king, and announced himself is the Lord of Lords, King of the King, the most fearing Lord in the universe at the center of the earth, right? They don't call this way in Chinese tradition. They call themselves the separated one, the lonely one, the unemployed one. That means they are humble. So I think that's the thing. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Jason. Ahmad, do you wish to comment or don't feel?
I can just support what Jason was talking about, the idea of humbling yourself in anything was paramount to all Chinese speakers, or all Chinese thinkers, all Chinese people of any status. I was actually trying to find the quote, but Sima Tian, the grand historian who basically starts the tradition of written history in China, the preamble to his Shiji is laced with this unworthy servant being no more than yada yada. It's a long, preamble buildup of how unimportant he is in producing one of the most seminal works of Chinese culture and history. And given his actual position in life, it was true, but it was of a tone, and it set a tone where forever after, even those who achieved the greatest of achievements in Chinese history still, I don't want to say abased themselves, but even that title, Son of Heaven, to be the son of was the lesser position in basic Confucian values. The father has more control than the son. So when you're referring to the emperor as the son of heaven, you're using a title that implicitly puts him second to something else. And this is the most important person in all of China at any given time. So yeah, it really permeated consistently through Chinese culture, and still to this day has some strange sort of, you can meet people at a playground, a mother with kids, and the kids are running around. You look at and over to try your Chinese and say, oh, what adorable child that is. And she'll stop and she'll say, that child's dumb. That child's lazy. That child's, no good. And in the West, it shocks the sensibilities, but it is, again, that humility that is reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and it permeates to just about every facet of the culture.
Wow. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Let me add something. I think I'm gonna make a very good point. The West, people in the West probably don't understand this one. For example, I give you, let's say I give Joe a gift. I would not say that. I would say that's a very, very unworthy gift, So the first time you may say, come on, you give me a very unworthy, cheap gift, but probably very expensive. I have to say in this way, it's very unworthy stuff. So I think that's a very different culture. So when we read something like in the Bible, the Lord of Lords, King of Kings, we think like, what? That's
interesting.
very strange,
Even the sort of refrain, nali is a way of, sort of removing yourself, not worthy, not me, something to that effect, which is how you respond to any sort of compliment, any sort of accolade.
Okay. Thank you for that. Wow, wonderful insights, both from Jason and Ahmad. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Evanique, do you have a question or would you like to comment on the poem itself?
I have a question.
Okay.
For Armand, when you were talking about the heavens and the ceiling of the sky, and then you said something about the movements in the heavens, can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, it is not the Tao, but it is another indicator within the world that we can that can be observed to see the Tao is consistent. That was the last line of that chapter 39, which was, or the opening line. 39, I believe. Sorry, I've been up since 4:30 a.m., so I'm a little rummy. But the heavens, if you imagine watching there's no big screen TV in 2nd century BC China. There's nothing, no radio, no music is a prescribed thing, very rarely. You went outside on a cold night, you sat and looked up at the stars for hours and hours and hours, and you watched these heavenly bodies in motion, in these almost surrealistic patterns of motion that people begin to interpret, people begin to understand. But just on the face of it, it's not as smooth and understandable as watching the sun go across the horizon. And even the sun, comes lower on the horizon as the year goes round, and then it starts coming higher again. So there's a cyclic order that you see when you observe the heavens. That sort of cyclic order is indicative of the cyclic order that is talked about when the Dao De Jing speaks of the cycles and behavior of the Tao. It is consistent, it is rhythmic, it is an ebb and flow. It can be expected to have the occasional aberration, like a comet or an eclipse or something like that, but it returns to its normal flow. That was, like I said, a role model. And even in very sort of abstracted religious terms, the heavenly court was then seen as the role model order of a numinous society or civilization that then could be modeled by the emperor and the empire. And so you had the Jade Emperor, who was considered to sit on the celestial throne. You had more innumerable gods and goddesses within the Taoist pantheon than anyone could bother to be counting. But they all hew to the same sort of, look how well they're doing it up there. Why can't we do it that way down here? So it did have religious understanding for some. In the philosophical construct, it wasn't necessarily the religion, but the example it set and what it told the keen observer about all of the Tao everywhere. That's about as good as I can probably get on that.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. So I have Charlie, followed by Katie, then Brian.
Yeah, I wanted to take a slightly different perspective on this question of the one. My approach, first of all, I should say, is to look at things from as many points of view as I can, and with a certain amount of deference given to the scientific point of view, so to speak, the materialist and so on, as to how that impinges upon the whole question of the human experience. And so recent research, let's see here, I'm going to go ahead and post this article by David Hecht. It was done in 2014. And this plays into Ian McGilchrist's ideas of the right brain and the left brain, okay? And the way I see a lot of Asian philosophy is that it's intuitive, okay? And it is holistic. And another way for that is it's right brain. And in all of this, there's writings in the Dao De Jing, I see it as you should, okay? So it's, in a sense, it's ethical. It's an ethical statement about this is how things should be done. If you're going to do them right, this is how. And so this kind of this holistic view of things, that's how I see the one. The one is like the whole, okay? It's all things taken in. and it does that on an intuitive level because nobody knew about the right brain back then, but they did have this sense of intuition of collectivity and harmony. And so this particular chapter I find particularly interesting because there's a tendency for those who hold positions of power to think of themselves as above the common herd, okay, and to get very arrogant and to think that they're special, like what very typically happens in Western civilization, like the divine right of kings. We're the rulers because God said we should be the rulers, and so you just have to listen to what we say or we'll kill you. And but for me, it's in Asia, this idea of the one is a holistic sort of thing, so that the concept of harmony and also the ethical dimensions of it are implicit in that whole concept, okay? And so taking into the account of the low, if you don't do that, okay, if you don't take everyone, in other words, if you have this tendency to want to go off and say, oh, aren't I great because I'm the leader, you're going to screw things up and you're going to get overthrown. Okay, that's like the last stanza in the poem for this chapter, and so that's kind of how I understand this particular chapter, and and also just as my own personal predilection is to think of Taoism as something that is a philosophy that could be used by everybody, not just by rulers, and so but I understand that a lot of the intention there is to ameliorate the tendencies of people who hold positions of power to not get arrogant in their use of power, which is pretty much a universal human characteristic. But if you have this social cultural structure that says don't do that, and so that it just permeates the entire culture, so that this idea of humility becomes a virtue, a very high virtue, and so that to try to dissuade people from engaging in bullying and arrogant and basically antisocial behavior. In this article that I mentioned, almost all of that type of awareness, okay, exists within the right side of the brain. So that the only thing that lateralizes on the left side of the brain is anger, okay, and so that in terms of the subtleties of relationships between people, it's all right brain, and except for anger, okay, and another example is Schadenfreude. Taking joy in the suffering of your enemy, that's left brain, okay? So for me, I honor the attempt to go back in time and to understand the culture and so on. And it's kind of like the difference between Antonin Scalia and what's his name, Breyer. You have the law, and how can you interpret the law? Is a law something that is fixed in time, and you have to go back and look at the intention of the founders and when they wrote the law, that you can only interpret it in that way? There can't be any other way? Or is it something that is flexible and lives with the time? And I think that it's better to have something, a philosophy is going to be living. It has to be something like an open system and be able to be flexible and fit the times within which it exists. If it doesn't, then it's kind of like a dead philosophy. It's once the times change, then it's no longer appropriate for anything because the times have changed. Anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I think it's an important way to, I believe, it's an important way to understand this concept of oneness. And my feeling is, my impression is that the early Taoists understood that. Okay, they didn't put it into words, but they, this whole idea of humility is definitely in harmony with this whole idea of having empathy and concern and just having basic pro-social feelings, that there's certain things you just don't do because they're wrong. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Next up, I have Katie, and Jason and Aman, feel free to comment at any time.
I agree with what Charlie said with like one is like a whole number and it gives a sense of like not being divided. And then I liked your point about kind of liberalizing the Tao to be more inclusive towards everybody. And then my points were that I liked, my favorite part of this chapter was the comment about being lonely. I always say to myself, like, well, you just have to find other people who are in the same boat. And there aren't many people in their boat. It's like if you're, I don't know, whatever you are, you're a meetup organizer, well, then you can join a club for meetup organizers. But for them, they're part of a small elite. Though I agree with Charlie, the main point is a little bit the tendency to become a little bit arrogant with power. And then my second and final point is that I would just soften it. The last part was like, instead of do not wish to be shiny like jade, but I think really the point is that the most important thing is being a foundation, and that you can shine, but more important is being a foundation. I don't think that unless the point is that you don't want to be arrogant, but I think it's okay to shine.
Thank you, Katie. And next up, I have Brian.
So I just want to explore a bit kind of unpack one aspect of this humility, and that is the difference, what I think is a pretty striking difference between the emphasis on oneness and the harmony and the great things that come out of oneness that's in most of this verse, and then the way the leader refers to himself or herself. He refers to himself or herself as lonely or separated. That suggests that he or she is not a part of the oneness. And so what is that about? Yes, I think that's humility. Obviously the verse calls it humility, but what is the effect of that? I think the effect of that is to elicit sympathy from those who hear that statement, and sympathy and support, and also to initiate that the others will take initiative around the problem you've identified or the proposal that you've made. So it elicits, I think it elicits sympathy and initiative from other people. The leader then is a little more passive by taking this, at least in the first instance, a little more passive, deferential to others in building a consensus, and that leads to harmony. That leads to oneness. So I just wanted to unpack a bit what I thought was the dynamics there of the leader pointing, I guess, suggesting that he or she is not a part of this oneness and really needs some help.
Aman, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, actually, I think, Brian, you made a really astute observation. And I do think there are layers at work in this if you read it as a text written for someone in that position. Lao Tzu is quoting when he says, this is why rulers choose humble words like the separated one, the lonely one, the unsalaried man. He's not saying that they are that. He's saying that they choose those terms to affect that, to have that affect, to create sort of a false humility. And he would have been well aware, anyone who would have wrote this at the time, would have been well aware of how much of a facade so much of the humility of the time actually was, which I think is his greater point here, which is you can play at it, you can pretend at it, but you are not actually achieving it unless you really do try to be part of this whole, this oneness. And it wasn't advice that strictly was just for a ruler. It was advice that was later passed down to even the scholarly literati who would achieve great heights through, success in the exam systems. And they would basically be the rock stars of their day. But if they had a good teacher who was also feeding them some of these Taoist texts, it was reminding them, yes, you now have achieved all of your greatest dreams. You are exempt from coolie labor and you can't be, subject to capital punishment, but don't get too full of your head. You need to remember that you're here in service of all of these other people. So even if you feel like a separated one or a lowly or this humble servant, you actually need to be the servant. You need not just play at it. That's kind of what I think is coming through in the text there.
Fantastic points. Margarita, then is it May? Am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, it's May.
Okay, so Margarita, go for it.
Yeah, actually, my question is still related with Brian. I think I still pondered with this idea about what is this oneness in the sky and in the land. Just an example, in Indonesia, people who live close to Mount Merapi, whenever the Merapi erupts, they know that after this disaster, the land will be so fertile, they can grow anything. So to some extent, and they know it will happen every other year, like it's frequently. So they know this is the balance of their life. They're close to the ground, close to the basin. So I think this is the idea of oneness. Just like Dao, we learned from the first chapter, the first part, there is this harmony, but I try to understand why it kind of deviates when the De introduce here that these rulers, the scholars, need to be exercise this self-abasement, but they kind of deviates from the Dao. So how does this work? Yeah, thank you.
Jason, would you like to comment? Go ahead.
This one. Okay, first, I don't know. Okay, that's my first question. Yeah, that's my job is just translate what the text it is. Okay, then others just my own understanding. I don't see I have a better understanding. But I just want to say is even this part is the part. I don't think we should stick with this text as an organized text because the ordering it's controversial. Okay, we don't know. Okay, but I try to do is each chapter I will consider it's a complete argument. Okay, that's what I try to do. Is that all correct? I'm not sure, but I just treat the text as a complete argument. So like there's a different argument, but we don't know, what is the right order. Is this one like your question? Why you talk about oneness during the De? Okay, so they're probably not talking about De, okay, during this time. But I would suggest you look at chapter 42, okay, talk about one, because that's important, talk about one, the Tao will produce one. And another concept of that one could be totality, okay, because everything just from one. And the one will produce two, which is yin and yang, and the two will produce three, okay, and the three will do the everything. So if you ask me why, I don't know. Amma may have an answer, but I don't. Okay, that's a mystical question. So that's what I'd like to say. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll take a stab at this, and I'm not going to say that I have a definitive answer because much like Jason says, I don't know that this is what was meant from the text. But when he talks about chapter 42 and this idea of the one gave birth to the two, gave birth to the three, I actually did a paper on the metaphysics of the Dao De Jing. And that's one of the seminal chapters on that subject. In that paper, I elect to use the same sort of Taoist how would I say this right? Sort of the proto-Taoist concepts that existed throughout China. So when I talk about it in the paper, I say that from the one, we could consider that qi, that the Tao is with or without qi, but everything that exists after the existence of the Tao, in order for it to have any anima of any kind, requires qi. Qi requires that it cycles through yin and yang. It might be that this chapter is intimating at that with the idea of oneness as well. You need to be acquainted with the character and quality of qi that exists in the heavens, in the earth, in the spirits, in the basin. Because kind of what I was saying before about the movement of the heavens, the qi of the heavens, you can observe that to have a better understanding of the qi that is supposed to be ubiquitous. I won't go into a long dissecting of what qi is because there are volumes written on that subject, but that was my take on it in the paper I wrote, more pulled from chapter 42 than from this chapter. It is possible, though, that this chapter is getting at that same notion.
Joe, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. That was wonderful. I'm on. So I have May, then Evanika.
All right. I'm gonna try and go at this. So I think when I was thinking about the ruler being an orphan or like the lonely one and the salaried servant, I was thinking about I think what oneness here means kind of to have like the equilibrium. So it's like a balance. So he is clearly a ruler. So someone who's like great, who's powerful and all that, that's pretty obvious. It doesn't have to be pointed out. But at the same time, like, I guess like when he talks about like how he's also, someone who is lowly, it is kind of like bringing a balance there, like an equilibrium. And because of that equilibrium, it is whole, it is complete, because, you can see it's very obvious that he's a powerful person, but he's also that lowly person because he's always alone. He's someone who needs to serve. And if he doesn't see that, it's not going to be complete. But having those two come together, it brings a complete picture of who he really is, and I think a lot of the other things as well, like, the sky, the land, the basin, everything goes through a cycle, right? Like the sky goes through a certain kind of like cycle, and that's why it's complete. Without that cycle, it's not a one, it's not complete. And I think that can be applied to the other elements as well.
Thank you. Thank you, May, very much. Evanik.
Yeah, something that Aman brought up a little bit ago when he was talking about that a leader must serve, not just say that they're humble, but actually serve. It made me think of, and something Mai just said too. It made me think of like real world leaders, like good ones, who actually do serve the people. Like they see their job as a servant. I think you can obviously look to the Bible and look to Jesus. You can also look to modern day leaders like Martin Luther King. You can look at certain world leaders that really see themselves as servants and that they're serving others. And not only does it make them leaders, but it also separates them in doing something that's tough, but even though they know it's the right thing to do, it leaves them with a sense of loneliness because other people are telling them
Is that me or is that Avanique that just froze?
No, I think she just froze.
Okay.
Oh, I did?
Yes, you did.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear me?
No,
Oh, man.
just for
Sorry.
the, just for the last 20 seconds. That's all.
Okay. So I was thinking of certain leaders that have to do the right thing,
Mhm.
but then they have to separate themselves from other people that are trying to tell them differently, even though they know what is right. Not like in a I'm great type of way, but in a way that they're going to have to do difficult things. They're going to have to make difficult decisions, like when we talk about presidents who have to go to war and, presidents who have to make those difficult decisions, they have to stand alone in that because it's their responsibility. So I think there's an element there of leadership where this poem's talking about too, where they're going to have to stand alone and be humble.
Thank you, Avanique. David.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question for Jason and Amon about the end of the poem, the last line where it's talking about jade. I was curious if there's any special significance to that choice of precious object in Chinese. I mean, why did you choose that to diamonds or gold or whatever else that they could have used for that?
Yeah, in China, ancient China, jade is important. That's no, when they talk about good, if you go to the Taipei, the National Museum, you will see amazing, a lot of jade from the ancient. So jade is good thing. And Chinese use silver instead of gold for 2,000 years. That's just some historical, So jade probably in general, in this time, probably in general means precious stone. So I think that's, and during that time, they have a lot of story about jade, because it's precious. And you think about jade, if you know the jade is not something you can see, it's something in the rock, right? You see it's a rock, you have to open it, then you know they have the jade inside, and you don't know the quality. So I think that amazed ancient Chinese people during that time, and they have a lot of, during the warring state, they have a lot of story about jade, and we can share later, but not related, but jade is important.
Thank you very much. That was a great question. Actually, I had a similar question. Brian.
So I was also wondering earlier, I think this was Margarita's question, what is the, or maybe it was May's question, the oneness. What is the oneness? And the line I looked to in this poem to get a handle on it is the all things having attained oneness would be productive. And if they haven't, then they become extinct. So all things having attained oneness. So oneness is something other than all things, first of all. And then from that, I think you could say that oneness is not a thing. So what is it? Is it a quality or characteristic of all things? It's a quality and characteristic of maybe all things, and can be a quality or characteristic of everything, because he talks about land and sky and valley and spirit. All of these things can or cannot have oneness. So it's a quality, or I don't know, but this is me puzzling it out, a quality that may or may not attain to all things or to any one thing in particular. But it sounds like oneness, to put it in the vernacular, is a good thing to have or to do, be a part of the oneness. Then you are fulfilling, I don't know, the words start to fail me, but you can just kind of indicate what it might be, that you fulfill your purpose, you're in harmony, you support others, if you have this or are part of this oneness. So to me, it's like a relationship or a force that is not a thing and which animates all things. It's like harmony would be another word.
Yeah, let me try to explain this one. Okay, but I don't see there's a correct, there is any correct answer in this universe about what is oneness. Just like you want to talk about Trinity, I think it's the same thing. And if you read Confucius analog, okay, same situation, the famous benevolence or humanness or so-called Ren, okay. Confucius analog only have 10,000 characters, and they talk about this word "ren" 100 times. Okay, so but never give a correct answer. Every time talk about, oh, this one do this, do this. So technically, that's the same way, same vagueness of this word one. So we only can use the supporting text to understand. I just like to share, okay, my understanding of oneness in Dao De Jing is the unchanging law. Okay, because from the beginning, the first chapter already talked about they had something. The Dao can be spoken. It's not usually translated as not regular Dao, but I read different. I see that word means unchanging, 常. Because during the through many chapters, constantly explain this word. That means there's, if you think about in this universe, they have the law, Newton's first law, second law, third law. They have the Einstein. They have many, many laws. They have the social. But if you think about the source, they must have something, okay, unchangeable, okay, not like permanenties, like something. Universe is unchanged, kind of like, or in Indian, right? They will talk about Brahman, right? Something unchanged, always there. I think that's something the Dao De Jing try to explain. The Dao, they will produce one, which is oneness, and everything starts from there. Okay, so I think that's my understanding to something. This must have something. Or if you read Aristotle, okay, Aristotle was put everything have the first principle, right? So you will say that's the first principle. Everything will start from the first principle. Okay, so that I think that's the way I'm thinking about oneness. And another thing I'd like to mention is okay. I talk about oneness. I talk about the other one later. So yeah, thank you.
If I can interrupt for just a moment, I want to add one other wrinkle to this conversation, or possibly a clarification. This common phrase, "the yi," which is here, which is what we're discussing, this oneness concept. One of the translators that I have put it in a very interesting way. And in his translation, he translates this term, "the yi," as unique. And he says, the unique is another name for the way. But it is also a political claim. The unique ruler has absolute claim over his state. The way enables things to realize their true essence, and hence is the basis of political rule. So this oneness is also an intimation to the Tao. It's just a different phrasing of it with other layers of additional meaning. But you'll notice that it's the yi, and that word "the" is right at the beginning, and that is the not subtext, but the text of the second half of the Dao De Jing. That's that word right there. So perhaps in thinking of this, not just as oneness, it was also translated as unity. He translates it as unique, but you're starting to see where these all are sort of pointing at or getting at this same notion of the Tao.
That actually clears up a lot for me personally. So thank you for that. Charlie.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit on Amon's choice of the word metaphysics. I know that that in Western philosophy, it's a very important word in that it combines two words. Okay, it combines ontology and epistemology. That's my understanding of what is a metaphysic. Okay, it's a combination of saying what is real, what actually exists, and then how do you know? Okay, how do you get to know this? And within Western civilization, the use of language is is pretty much paramount, especially since Plato, when he had his Platonic ideals and so on. And so, in the mathematics as being an example of a eternal truth and eternal law, okay. And so this way of thinking is what very Western way of thinking that the way you get to know something is by writing down some equations or something like that, writing down a law, you know. But when I really kind of got really disgusted with Western civilization when in my late teens and my early 20s, and the last book I read on Western philosophy was Edmund Husserl's Ideas, and I practically threw it against the wall because I was thinking, okay, great, we got some people called phenomenologists, maybe they're going to get into some of the wisdom of the East, like in Hinduism you have this idea neti neti neti, okay, not this, not this, not this, and the basic concept of ineffability, okay, so that the ultimate reality, okay, the ontology, if you will, is not something you can talk about. Okay, it's language, no, okay, and so the sense of forming an ontology, of saying something that this is what's real, this is what's going on here, this is the foundation of reality, like Qi, for instance. My understanding of Asian philosophy is that you don't do that. Okay, you just, ontology is ineffable. Okay, so it is when you speak of the one, you're speaking of all that is, but it's kind of like you'll never know it. Okay, and so like it says, if you speak the Tao, you're wrong. Okay, and so, but then what about epistemology? Even though you can't know it, can you have some kind of a relationship with it? Okay, and that's how I see Asian philosophy and religion. It's all about developing a relationship with the Tao, and or Buddha nature, or whatever you want to, whatever word you want to use for that which is ultimate reality. Okay, the ontology, if you will, the ineffable ontology, and so. So that like Buddhism, they have practices of meditation and so on, but I've never heard anybody speak. And this is something that really is interesting to me, because I would like to know if somebody has, well, Aman, you said you wrote a paper on the metaphysics of Taoism, which is really surprising to me, because it sounded like you're making this assertion that the ontology is Qi, and so maybe, I don't know, but are there people who've really spent some time on this and trying to tease out a metaphysics of Asian philosophy, because my understanding is that the ontology is kind of like well, you can't talk about it, it's ineffable, and so.
Charlie, you're taking me
Yeah.
back to grad school, because my professor used to have this same bout with me anytime I'd venture the word metaphysics within Taoism. He'd say, no, that's an Aristotelian concept. There is nothing after physics within Tao. And that's really the core of meta and physics. After the study of physics, what is there to study after you've studied the physics? And you're right. There's a comfort with an uncertainty in and a mistrust of language as a adequate tool for expressing these ideas. You can say that you can give something a name, but that's not its real name. You can have a discourse about the grand discourse, but that's not the discourse, or Dao Ke, Dao Fei Chen Dao. It's the opening lines for a very good reason. And the paper I wrote actually did address this. I actually wrote 4 papers. One was, but I stated pretty clearly in them that I was using a Western methodology to make what was in Eastern thought more palatable to minds that have been inculcated in a Western society. So when I'm talking about the metaphysics of the Tao, I'm not saying that there are truth claims laid out that are ontological, that they are, then ontological absolutes. It is more like I think I said impressionism in words. It's like looking at an impressionistic painting. You can see what it is, but you look closely at it, it becomes a blur. When discussing something like the Tao or the quasi-metaphysics of the Tao or the ontology behind the Tao, you can look at it and get the impression. But if you try and examine it too closely, the thing falls apart. And that's where I think that disclaimer really comes in. Qi is not a Taoist concept. It is a Proto-Asian concept that existed long before there were anything called Taoist, and long before there were anything called Buddhist or anything else. But it is so baked in that to the culture as a whole, that it's taken as sort of a ground state idea, much like we in the West will often take the notion of spirit or mind as not even something worth arguing unless you get into those deep academic papers. It's just colloquially, we understand these are things that everyone agrees that we're talking about something that is significant to all of us, even if we haven't got a definition for it. Qi is very similar within the Eastern zeitgeist, and it forms a really fundamental component of every other phenomena that emerges. When you look at someone's calligraphy, you're looking at the Qi of their calligraphy. When you eat someone's cooking, you're consuming the Qi of their cooking. It is there on the sort of substrata of everything else. And I think that was at least, if not then a component that Lao Tzu is pointing to in the Dao De Jing.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Aman.
yeah, thanks.
These are
Yeah,
great.
this is, I hope that we can continue with the discussion of this, because I think it's a really important issue. And
It is.
and so, because, there's kind of, the philosophical questions, but there's also the actual application of the philosophy. In other words, living the philosophy, and frequently that kind of complementarity is worth paying attention to. Anyway.
Thank you, Charlie. And with that, now I know it's nearly 10:40, but verse 40 is extremely short. So I'll ask Jason, would you mind sharing your version, and then everybody can line up and we could just comment. We'll probably be able to. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I think that'll be fine. That's
okay.
Very short, and the part
Okay.
is non-controversial, So, but
okay.
Before that, I'd like to 2 points I'd like to make. First is just like Aman said, Qi and the Yin Yang. That's before Dao De Jing. So if you do the word search in Dao De Jing, only mention Yin Yang once. Okay, in chapter 42. In Dao De Jing also mentioned Qi 3 times. Okay, so basically they are not talking about. They just assume. Okay, that's there already. So they are not going. The Dao De Jing not going to talk about this. That's the first thing I'd like to make. Second thing, I think I probably need everybody's suggestion. That's constantly in Dao De Jing use the word. I think the translator usually put the 10,000 things, okay? And I translate as all things. And I think that's incorrect. The correct meaning means the word by word is 10,000 stuff, okay? But the meaning is everything. deviant in this world, okay, except, yeah, everything deviant thing. So it's not mountain, not sky, not earth, not the body, not river, not ocean. The deviant things. So that includes the cow, the cat, and the rice, or the farming, okay, or agriculture, and the more important, all the people. Okay, so I don't know what would be the best word to use. I always translate as all things, but I think that probably a little bit confusing. So if anybody have a better suggestion, please let me know. You know, but that's, I think that one probably, you know, confuse people a lot. So let me share the screen on the chapter 42. I think that, not 40. That's very 40. Simple, right? Chapter 40. So basically, on its return, the Tao is moving. By its tenderness, the Tao maintains its functioning. All things, again, that's the thing I talk about, in the world. 天下, that's the under the sky. Okay, so I translate as the world. Okay, because when Chinese talk about under the sky, that means the entire world. And these four words usually together, all things, 天下万物, that means all things in the world. Okay, the 10,000 things under the sky. Okay, so are born out of being. Okay, and being is born out of nothingness. So basics, that's the very simple. That's the being was from nothingness, and then everything under the heaven, under the sky, is from being. Okay, so basics. That's I think that's very simple, and then probably you have a different translation and different understanding. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So folks, line up to read your favorite translations, and then we can discuss, or please actually let's have Aman comment first.
I just, actually, I didn't want to comment my own comment. I wanted to read a very short comment by Wang Bi, who is very famous Chinese philosopher. I think he was mentioned the other week, but he wrote a commentary about this chapter, and it's very short. But he says, things under heaven all are generated through being. What being begins from is by taking beingless as its root. If you want to attain the fullness of being, you must return to being less. It was that commentary that led me to part with Jason on originally something in working this chapter, the notion that this is strictly a cosmological or a creation ex nihilo sort of chapter. Wang Bi seems to think that this idea of taking beingless as its root and returning to beingless indicates, again, this sort of cyclic nature of this, what this commentator actually refers to as another of the metaphysical chapters of the Dao De Jing, which that's not me. I'm actually reading it. I would share my my book, but yeah. So it's simple, it's terse, it's very sweet, but it is interpretable and it can be delved into quite deeply.
Thank you for that.
And it also follows chapter 41 in the Mawang Dui version. So this would be chapter 41 in that version, and chapter 40 would be the next one. So one more thing about the strange order of chapters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to chapter 42 now. Folks,
yeah,
go ahead.
Let me add something.
Please.
Because the last sentence on this one, let's talk, my translation, I basically talk about the being is born out of nothingness. And this one is kind of similar like the creation, right? A creation ex nihilo, right? So in the Bible's sense, but it's not, right? just like Armand said, from the beginning, they have this cyclical sense instead of like the Big Bang sense. So that's the big difference in this one and the Bible. That's the big, if you want to compare, that's the big difference.
Thank you. And so, folks, now it's your opportunity to be able to read your version, your favorite version. Go ahead and type exclamation point if you wish to read verse 40. So, Avanique.
Yeah, so mine's is God is nature sees God. Returning is the movement of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. All things in the world are born of being. Being is born of non-being.
It's very close to a couple of the translations that I have, actually. Anyone else? Anyone else wish to read their version? Margarita.
I will read in bahasa. Sifat kebalikan itulah pergerakan dari Tao. Sifat lunak itulah sesuai dengan sifat yang berguna dari Tao. Segala benda di alam ini semuanya tumbuh dari sang ada, tapi ada tumbuhnya dari tak ada.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to read their version? Elena.
Yes, mine is this one. The movement of the Tao, by contraries, proceeds, and weakness marks the course of Tao's mighty deeds. All things under heaven sprang from it as existing and named. That existence sprang from it as non-existent and not named.
Which version was that?
That was James Legg, 1891.
Interesting.
Yes, and it's what's striking to me is that he separates existence and he separates things, and it's just it's beautiful. It's very beautiful.
Thank you for sharing. It is beautiful. Absolutely. I agree with that. We have Brian and then Charlie.
Okay, I've gone back to the Kimura version for this.
Good.
Cyclic returning to the source is the rhythmic movement of Tao. Gentle spontaneity is the nature of its function. All beings derive their beingness from being, which is the Tao. And being arises in and as nothingness, which is the Tao.
Thank you, Brian. And I have Charlie.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to be reading again from Roger Ames. It's really irritating getting an old memory system. Anyway, returning is how waymaking Tao moves. The weakening is how it functions. The events of the world arise from the determinate, and the determinate arises from the indeterminate. Wu. Could I just read the commentary? It's really short.
Sure.
The swinging doors of the gateway open, and embarking upon its initial phase of becoming increasingly determinate, the inchoate thing or event emerges within its already determinate context. Culminating in its full maturation, the event then begins its gradual process of decline. As the journey continues, any persisting determinate aspects are ultimately weakened and overtaken by indeterminacy, concluding this sojourn into determinacy by its return to the indeterminate. Just as being born is a certain death sentence, any phenomenon or event in its first steps on this journey toward consummation has set off on the road home. From the very start of its, as it makes its way forward, its movement is one of returning, and its optimum potency is not in its consummation, but in its initial generation. From that point onward, it is a downhill slide. And for me, okay, my understanding of the idea of nothingness within Asian philosophy is not present. Okay, it doesn't mean that it ceases to exist, but it's not present. So that the one, so to speak, contains all. You know, so that being is potential. You know, everything has a potential to be. So that there's just, but it's just not there at the present time. Only, you know, so many things can take the stage at any one time. And they get on the stage, they have their time on the stage, and you know, whether or not it signifies nothing with, you know, sound and fury, it's theory, etc., is another question. But it's important for me when I distinguish the word nothing, to distinguish between East and West. There's a tendency in the West to say that when something becomes nothing, it ceases to exist, and that existence only takes place within the present reality. So once it's either there or it's not there. And in the sense of it exists or it does not exist, so it goes into nothingness, and so I think that it's for me, from my understanding, it's important to distinguish between those two different concepts of nothing. They're different; they're not the same.
Yeah, there was verse 11 where I had a similar feeling about that actually. Jason, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, I just like to agree with Charlie to bring up this very subtle difference, because when I do the translation, and most translation translates as being, actually Chinese language doesn't have the word be. Okay, so in the actual words is you, that means have. Okay, so Charlie, you are right. That's not really mean being. That means existence or cease to exist, cease existing, or not not having. Okay, this kind of not really not being. Basically, we use Western metaphysical words to interpret. But again, you can say, I can argue as that's what they mean. That's what Taoists mean. Okay, but just lack of the proper language to express. Okay, that's another way to talk about. But you know, you are right. The language doesn't have the concept of being. That's right. But do they think about being? Probably. That's why this text is a little bit mystical. Yeah, that's.
So, folks, type exclamation point now if you wish to share or what you got out of this particular poem or verse, and feel free to go ahead and type exclamation point. Anyone? No one? No one has any comments about it? Evanique?
Yeah, when I was reading this the first time, I was looking at my notes and I thought of it as the OODA loop. And the reason why I thought about it is because it's like all cyclical. It's like returning to the movement of the Tao. And then the last line is like being born of non-being. So it starts with nothing. And well, I wouldn't say it starts of nothing. I think it would say it starts from source. Like it starts from source and ends with source because it all comes out of source. So when they say, when I saw born of nothing, I thought of chaos and it returns to source, which one could also say is chaos, and then it goes to order and then it goes back out to chaos. That's what I got out of it. I think the part about yielding is the way of the Tao is kind of going back to flow, or just, you know, letting things run through you. I also thought about yielding in terms of yielding to what you cannot control. It's like you kind of like, if you can't control it, you can't do anything about it, just yield to it and then just go through what it is to go through. And then it'll always just come around, it'll do a loop again. And there'll be something else you can't control, and then you'll get through that. And then, it'll just be cyclical. So that's what I thought.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. May.
Mine's more of a question. I wonder if this part, all creation is born from substance. Does that mean, is that like a reincarnation? Does that include that?
I'll defer to
like-
Jason on that because actually I'm not sure.
Yeah. Is that like the concept of
have-
reincarnation?
Okay, that's about the point that I take in reading Dao De Jing. Okay, because it's very similar to Buddhism thinking. But it's before Buddhism. Okay, so I try very hard to avoid any kind of Buddhism interpretation when I do the translation. So my answer would be no. And I don't see there's any incarnation, reborn, samsara concept during the pre-Buddhism time in China. So I would say no, that's not. And I will try very hard when I do the translation. I try very hard, sometimes too hard, okay, to avoid any word from Buddhism.
Thank you.
So is there anyone with any other comments they wish to share? If not, Jason, would you like to make any more comments? Do you have anything
No, I think that's great. And,
okay.
And I think for the next few chapters, probably Amang is the expert because he is the real scholar on the Dao De Jing, Taoism metaphysics. Okay, so the another next one is talk about metaphysics. That's his expertise. He's real scholar among. Unless somebody is real scholar, I'm not. I don't know, but Amang is a real scholar on this. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to 41 and 42. Yes, he's going to be away, I think, for 43 and 44 you mentioned. But after this evening, yes, I think that this was a really great discussion this evening. And I do want to talk more about the metaphysics of it as we go forward. So just to do a quick announcement of some upcoming meetups. Tomorrow evening, we will be hosting Comprehensivist Wednesdays, which is actually in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. And it's music at its best can help us be our best, discussing the ineffability, I'm assuming, I don't have the ineffable and Comprehensivist Wednesdays. And then on Thursday, we have the Gospel of John, chapter 2. We've been going through the Bible, and yes, so and then Friday is actually a special event. Jason, do you want to mention that? Because it's Unpacking Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Unfortunately, I have a conflict, and that's one of my favorite books to really discuss, so.
Actually, that's we are going. Zach and I are going to spend review on this whole book. Okay, so it's a 13 chapters, and basically we are going through 13 chapters. It's not that long. Okay, so we're going through probably only half size of the Dao De Jing, and we're going through the Sunja, and we are going to in the way of dialogue between Zach and I. Okay, going to talk about this book, and then we open up for the question for the next hours. So that's the format we are going to do.
I will try and join late. I'll do everything I can to make that. Which translation will you be using? Just out of curiosity.
right now we are using the Jessica Heggie. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, but again, you probably, if you know me, you know it, I will use my own way to translate, and then that's the reason I choose this book is there are a lot of graphic, a lot of chart in each paragraph, so it makes your reading much easier. You know, so they draw a chart on each section.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's make your reading easy because it's very short. If you want to read the translation, you just print out, right? It's
Yeah.
only 3 pages. You have enough. But if you have a book like this, even for me, you know, it's easy to open it and see. Even I disagree the translation, but you know, that's good. You know, to
That's excellent. No, that's wonderful. And that brings us up that's everything for this week. So folks, I hope to see everyone this week at some point. Thank you. Welcome, May. We appreciated your contributions, and it was good to see everyone. And I'll see everybody soon later this week.
all right. See
Thanks,
Bye.
Joe.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Aman.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.